AA, or Alcoholics Anonymous, misdiagnosed me as alcoholic. I am actually neurodivergent, which is quite different. We are going to unpack all of that in this video here today. While the forest is foresting, can you hear the birds? It feels kind of magical. So I'm super excited to share this with you. I think it's one of the most important things I could share on the internet. So I'm really glad you're here. How I was misdiagnosed in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to tell you how it started, how my misdiagnosis in Alcoholics Anonymous started. And so basically, I was about 90 days sober in AA. So I did 30 days in rehab. And then the night I got out of rehab, I went to one meeting in rehab. And the night I got out of rehab, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm about 2 months into AA at this point. And there's a lot of pressure. You need to say you're an alcoholic. And I wouldn't say it. I didn't believe it. And then I'm sitting in a meeting and a guy gets up to, who is the speaker, and he shares his story. Now, from the outside, it gives me the chills because it was so powerful for me. From the outside, this guy looked nothing like me. He was more than twice my age. He was the opposite gender. He was the opposite sexual preference. He was the opposite race. He was the opposite weight. Like everything on the outside of him was completely different than me, but we had the same story. And so when he shared his story, it was the first time I had heard my story. I had never felt more seen in my entire life. And of course, judging by the outsides, that seemed weird. But he was talking about his thinking, his feeling, his sensing, and his perception, his whole experience, how he experienced the world. And I completely identified. He was describing my inner world in a way that nobody ever had before. And then he said, and this is all alcoholism. So I said, well, shit, if all of that he's describing on his insides is alcoholism, then I am that. Therefore, I am alcoholic. So that's how I first identified as an alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous. Yes, I self-diagnosed after much pressure from the outside, as you do, as you get when you're there. And so now, with wiser eyes, because I was in AA for 10 years and I've been out of AA for 5 years, with wiser eyes, I can see that what he was actually more likely describing that day that I related to was undiagnosed autism. I think the guy was autistic, and he was describing his autistic experience of life. And that's why, regardless of what he looked like on the outside and how different he could have been from me and the different life he could have had from me, I still heard my story because he was talking about the way that he thought, the way that he felt, the way that he sensed, the way that he perceived, the way that he experienced the world. And it wasn't just that one guy who shared his story. As people would get up and share their stories, there were different people that I related to. And now that I've been diagnosed autistic and ADHD, what I think was actually happening is I was relating to their neurodivergence, not this alcoholism, this huge thing that lives under the rug of our drinking, supposedly. So my sponsor told me back then that, and remember, I'm early days sobriety at this point. This is my first year of sobriety. I'm about 90 days when I first identified as an alcoholic. My sponsor made it clear that all of my problems had one name, because I'm an alcoholic, and that all of my problems had one solution. That's AA and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. She said, I don't think she opposed therapy like directly, but she told me every single problem I had can be solved with AA's 12 steps. I don't need to go to any other 12-step program. I don't need to get any other help. The outside issues aren't relevant. Everything is alcoholism, and everything that is going on with me can be solved through the 12 steps. That's absurd. This was, in her defense, 2009 when I got sober. So 2009, 2010, I still consider that like the cave days of mental health and maybe even addiction in some ways, and definitely neurodivergence. But it's simply not true. There's a lot that can be going on with us when we show up, when we drink our way into sobriety. Why ADHD and autism get missed in recovery? Society generally, not everybody, of course, but society still kind of considers autism to be a little 5-year-old white boy or Rain Man. There's a lot of misconceptions about what autism could look like. It's as if people are confused as fuck about what a spectrum is. That's like looking at the rainbow and you think that you know what a color is because you've seen purple And so when someone shows up neon orange, you say, you're not on the rainbow spectrum. You are nothing like purple. Purple is what the media told me. Purple is what society told me. Purple is the stereotype. Here you are, neon orange. You can't be on the rainbow spectrum because you're not fucking purple. It's a spectrum. And not only is autism a spectrum, they combined a bunch of different conditions back in, I think it was 2013 when the DSM-4 became the DSM-5 came out, and they brought it all together, including Asperger's, and they put it all together into autism spectrum disorder or condition, right? So there's ASD 1, 2, and 3. There's 3 levels. And so not only that, people think of autism as a spectrum from like high to low, light to dark, one thing to another thing, but it's not like a binary of a lot of it or a little of it. It's not like a lot of autism or a little of autism. It's more like there's all sorts of lines that go off like a star. And so one of those lines is sensory sensitivity, and you can vary on that day by day, but also season and in general. Then another one might be in hyper focus or monotropic thinking, which is commonly known as special interest, although I don't really like that term. But so there's different ways that the nervous system of somebody who's autistic can vary. So the spectrum isn't even a line. It's not one thing, and it's not one person, and it's not widely understood that it is a broad thing. There's a lot of people, and what the fuck spectrum means. So people get confused, and they through ignorance or maybe even ableism, but most likely through ignorance of thinking they know what something is when they really don't, they get confused, and so it's easier to get misdiagnosed when most people don't know what it is. So a lot of us don't know that we are it ourselves. I also want to say that AA comes with a huge pressure to conform to the core identity of alcoholic, at least in my experience and in pretty much all the meetings I went to. I didn't go to all the meetings in the world. You may have had a very different experience in a very different group, and it might have been different. But definitely there was a lot of high control in the meetings I went to, and it was like right out the gate trying to get people to identify as an alcoholic. And if you didn't, and this is pretty manipulative, but you're called that you're in denial, basically. So you can't win either way. If you want to be accepted by the group, you basically have to identify what the group is identifying as. And I remember my very first meeting of AA I went to is when I was in rehab. And I walked in the door. I only went because the person that I was going with, I thought they were kind of cool and I liked them. And so I went with them in the rehab little bug, the optional AA meeting. And I go in there, and as I'm thinking in my head, as I walk in the door that night, my very first ever Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I'm saying to myself in my head, I'm not going to let them make me say that I'm an alcoholic. And then I sit down and they say, is it anybody's first meeting? I raise my hand. There's like 200 people in here. By the way, I'm like having an anxiety attack, even like not being at rehab, even just existing without alcohol at this point. I'm a couple weeks into sobriety because I did 30 days in rehab. I'm coming off benzos. I'm about like 7 days off benzos at this point. If you've ever gotten off benzos, I have a whole playlist about getting off benzos because it's so fucking difficult. Like, it's not a vibe. It's not a time to be high pressured, but they're pressuring me. And then the whole room is looking at me, basically waiting for me to say what you know that they want me to say, which is, hi, I'm Kirsten and I'm an alcoholic. And after about 30 seconds, I finally said it. And I felt so pissed off about it because it was because the pressure was just unreal. I'm literally having a panic attack and I just want these eyeballs off me. So I betrayed myself in order to make the pressure stop because I was about to explode, because I was highly vulnerable and coming off benzos and coming off alcohol and in rehab, in sobriety my first couple of weeks. So that's the first time I said it, but I didn't say it again until I was 90 days sober because I didn't believe it. Another thing to point out here is that, in my opinion, alcoholism is used as like a catch-all phrase for a lot of things. That was true back in the 1930s when the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written, and still currently today. So some of the things that might actually be going on when people refer to themselves or other people as an alcoholic are mental health issues, unresolved trauma, unrecognized neurodivergence, emotional dysregulation, lack of coping skills, or even personality disorders. Yet people are really self-righteous about this term. I know that I have been, and for good reason, because we can be harmed by people in their drinking, especially when they're drinking addictively. And so we can tend, because of media, because of culture, because of victimhood, because of whatever, to call somebody an alcoholic, because in a way it makes us be able to recognize someone's behavior that's harmful. It could also be out of victimhood, like maybe you say my mother or my father or my uncle or so and so was an alcoholic, or I grew up in an alcoholic home. It's a way to express something, but a lot of the times what people mean when they say that isn't so much about the fact of the drinking and the inability to control the drinking. It's about the behavior. And a lot of the people who drink in the first place have all those things going on underneath, undiagnosed, unresolved, whatever it is. So calling someone an alcoholic, it misses everything else that's going on. It's like the tip of the iceberg that yes, there is drinking. And when they're drinking, maybe they're saying things that aren't cool, or they're doing things that aren't cool, or they're straight up violent or be doing things that are illegal and like very harmful. But under the surface, there's a lot of other stuff going on that if you just say alcoholic, you're missing everything down here. You're giving them an identity, you're diagnosing them or yourself without looking at the entire iceberg where there's a bigger picture. And the reason why the bigger picture is so important is because that's how we break through. That's how we get free. That's how we resolve stuff. That's how we heal. That's how we become better people. That's how we move forward, by understanding what's actually happening. Misdiagnosis in AA is very common. And something I need to point out, just to be Captain Obvious for a second, but it might not be obvious for everybody, is that alcoholism is literally not a diagnosis, not in America. So I'm not sure where you're watching from, and let me know what country you're watching from in the comments, and if it's an actual diagnosis there, because I don't want to say it's not a diagnosis anywhere. I'm only going to speak from where I'm from, and it's not an official diagnosis in America, and it hasn't been in decades. Yes, it's pointing to a real thing. That real thing is called alcohol use disorder. That would be the current diagnosis for somebody who has an addiction to alcohol or a drinking problem in the United States. So everybody who's identifying as an alcoholic is technically, but it feels brutal to say, a misdiagnosis. If we're going by the standard medical DSM-5 that we use in America, it's not an actual diagnosis. It's alcohol use disorder. Now, there was benefit for me in being inside AA and using alcoholic as my identity, and therefore self-diagnosing as one and going by that, because I was in the ideology, and being in the ideology of AA did help me stay sober, especially in the beginning when I really needed to recover my brain from the damage that essentially that alcohol did to it, so that I could have the ability to not drink and it wouldn't be a problem. And I could learn how to resolve my trauma, manage my emotions, figure out a lot of things about living without drinking, which actually was really hard in the beginning. So there was a reason, and it was a good reason for me to identify that way. But it's technically not a diagnosis. So I'm not suggesting that anybody diagnosed or not diagnosed or anything like that at all. I'm certainly not a doctor, a therapist, or your medical provider or anything like that at all. I'm literally a chick in the woods coming to you from the forest just to share some of my thoughts, because I really think that this could be one of the most liberating things that we talk about. What really is going on under the addiction? It was very liberating for me. In fact, it might have been the most liberating thing of my life to get properly diagnosed. Since I came out a week ago saying on the internet for the first time that I left Alcoholics Anonymous, if you didn't see that video, I will pop it up here. I also, in that video, I said that I was diagnosed autistic and ADHD. That was also the first time I've said that on the internet. And a lot of people have come out and said the same thing to me. A lot of women in specific who I personally know from recovery, from the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, have left AA because I didn't talk about it. I left AA 5 years ago, did not talk about it, didn't know who left, didn't talk about it really with anybody from AA, except for the people that I was really close with who I knew left as well. And so I got a lot of DMs, a lot of messages, a lot of comments from people saying, I left AA as well. I also found out that I'm autistic or ADHD or autistic and ADHD or ADHD, which is what it's called. So I'll show the receipts here. I'll show you some of the DMs and some of the receipts that I got, some of the comments that I got, because I actually suspect that a lot of us women, especially in Alcoholics Anonymous, are being misdiagnosed alcoholic when we're actually autistic and or ADHD. Yes, we had a drinking problem, but what was underneath that drinking problem? What were we medicating with alcohol? That's what we're talking about here, getting clarity so that we have an accurate framework for us to look through as we move forward with our life, something that's really going to help us. I have another friend that I know from early days AA, so 2009, 2010, 2012, like that, the first couple of years. She was a couple of years ahead of me, which like is forever. Like when I came in at 30 days and she had 3 years, it was like forever, like 3 years seemed impossible. And I spoke to her on the phone last night. It was so fun for her to reach out to me now that she knows I'm safe, because she saw online that I left AA and she did too. She also left 5 years ago when the pandemic started. And she was saying that, yeah, that she in AA, she didn't really realize it, but that she has depression and bipolar 2 and ADHD, and that she was using essentially Alcoholics Anonymous to medicate her mental health, her neurodivergence, her natural wiring or way of being uh, with AA, and that she wasn't actually treating what was actually going on because that was the culture. And weren't a lot of us through the culture either told not to be on meds from our doctor, or we told people not to be on meds? But who the fuck are we to talk about meds? Like, as far as what somebody else should do, especially in a high control group where people listen to their sponsor. They're told you have to listen to yours. If you don't listen to us, you're in danger, you're going to die. And so there's a lot of pressure. And quite frankly, none of us are medical professionals. And maybe the ones that aren't actually treating the sponsees as patients. It's not actually in a clinical setting. So really, there is no business giving specific medical advice within any support group. Doctors do that. So I really fully believe we should get actual diagnoses and get actual treatments from actual medical providers. I'm not saying self-support groups don't have their place. I'm really glad I went to AA. That was really what was on offer in 2009. There's a lot of other ways to get sober now that weren't on offer then. Also in 2009, how was I going to be diagnosed autistic? That would have been like literally impossible. Women like me were not diagnosed. I couldn't see through. I didn't know I was masking. I didn't know what autism was. I didn't know that I would have qualified for it. So there wasn't really a way for me to get that clarity earlier. So when I make these videos and I'm talking about this, I really feel like there's nobody to blame. This isn't about blame. This isn't about anger. This isn't about that someone's doing it wrong or something. There's no shame. It's more like, let's wake the fuck up now, because we know better now. Let's do better now. It's 2025. Like, literally, we've been to hell and back. If you're in sobriety, if you drank your way into sobriety, you've been to hell and back most likely. I was in hell and have come back. We deserve better. That's all I'm saying. I don't know what path to recovery anybody should take. What I'm saying is, let's get clear on what the fuck is going on so we can actually get support, accommodations. And I don't know, as cheesy as it sounds, live our best life, whatever that means, by knowing how we are so we can know how to support ourselves and work with ourselves and figure out a plan forward and what kinds of things that we need so that we can thrive. What does our brain need? What does our emotions need? Because it's not just AA that does this, is it? Society, culture, Hollywood, media. A lot of people will just throw the brand alcoholic on somebody and kind of ignore everything else going on. And then you go to a church basement and you're told not to see doctors and not to get outside help, not to get support. A lot of us are told that. No, that's not the AA program in and of itself. Let me just defend that for a minute, okay? That's not what the book says. That's not what the program says, but that's the culture. That's what a lot of us do. That's what a lot of us were told. That's what a lot of us went through and experienced. And so I think it's about having a conversation about getting genuine help, getting actual medical professionals to help us. Don't have to leave AA if it's working for you. Don't have to leave anything if it's working for you and supporting you. Anything that's helping you get and stay sober or move forward in your life is probably great, right? All right, leaving AA can feel like withdrawal. For me, 100%, I got a daily reprieve, the daily reprieve that Alcoholics Anonymous promises. I got that. So let's talk about that. What is that? So for me, I had trauma early in childhood. My first sexual abuse experiences were when I was 6 years old. So as far back as I can really remember, I had dysregulation and unresolved trauma. Plus, autism is neurodevelopmental, and so is ADHD. So I was always neurodivergent, just didn't know it. So my system was always a bit different. Actually, I think that's why the predators, they can see it. They can see who's socially different. They can spot us out, especially the autistic girls. You know, the stat that kills me. 9 out of 10 autistic girls are sexually abused by the time they're 18. It's a fucking thing. Autistic women are 13 times more likely to die by suicide than non-autistic women. We fucking deserve better. My hope with making this video and a lot of what I'm doing here talking about leaving AA is so that autistic women can get diagnosed sooner, so that we can know who the fuck we are and support ourselves, so that we can heal our trauma, understand ourselves, grow into self-trust, stop gaslighting ourselves, understand when other people are gaslighting ourselves, and move on, whether we leave recovery or not, whether anything. That's really like my deeper why. If I'm going to be up here in the woods with the chirping birds and get real for a second, that's what's driving me for this, because these conversations need to be happening. We need to understand what's happening under the addiction. That's what I believe, and how to resolve things and how to move forward in the best way possible, how to support ourselves, how to accommodate ourselves. We've been through a fucking enough, so let's talk about it. Please, by the way, who let the dogs out? Please, by the way, drop in the comments if you're vibing with any of this, if you relate to any of this, if any of this was your experience, if you know what I'm talking about. I want to hear from you in the comments. And the other people who are reading the comments who are too afraid to comment anything because they're not ready to come out publicly yet to talk about any of this, they're gonna love reading your comments. So that would be a great service if you felt called to share anything, to share it, of course. Oh, look at you! You're so cutie. Oh, we did it. Have fun. Oh my god, so cute. So I had the childhood trauma, dysregulation, already dysregulated a bit because the neurodivergence, mental health issues because that turned into anxiety and there was PTSD and things like that. And then the alcohol medicated that. So alcohol was a self-medication. And then when I got to sobriety, when I got to recovery, AA was a self-medication. Absolutely, I was self-medicated. And doing things like speaking in the meetings, that's releasing adrenaline. I'm scared, and then I share, and then I feel connected. So now I have oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine. All sorts of chemicals from inside of me are being released as I'm participating in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as I'm feeling seen, as I'm feeling heard, as I'm feeling like I'm relating to other people, as I'm connecting with them and doing fellowship, as I'm working with a sponsor or responsees, or however I'm participating in the program itself of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm getting a daily reprieve, not because necessarily of why they say I am, because I have a spiritual malady, but because literally of the chemicals that are being released in my brain. And what I know about my brain specifically, autism and ADHD, there are certain chemicals that may be a little bit lacking. When I look at the studies of autism, it talks about oxytocin may be lower. When I look at ADHD studies, it talks about dopamine may be lower. So I'm giving myself a biochemical experience by going into the program of AA and participating. That's actually giving me a daily reprieve. So when I leave Alcoholics Anonymous, I hope the wind isn't making this sound bad for you. I got a little fluffy guy right here. Hopefully that takes care of the wind. Otherwise, I'm really sorry. So when I leave AA, I'm no longer medicated. So I've already resolved some of my early childhood trauma. I did that while I was in AA. I went to therapy and did other things. So I've resolved some of the trauma, but I don't know I'm neurodivergent yet. I haven't learned how to work with my neurodivergence yet. And I end up leaving AA and I'm no longer having that self-medication from AA. So here I am dysregulated outside of the 12 steps, wondering, what the fuck is this? How do I deal with this? What's going on? So if that's where you're at now, if you've left AA and you're having a hard time, you're feeling dysregulated, you're having all sorts of emotions, first of all, it's hard to be shunned by the tribe or to leave a community. That's like a very tribal thing, that if we leave, we don't want to be kicked out of the tribe, or we don't want to be shunned from the tribe, because deep in our DNA, that means that we're not going to survive. If we're out of the tribe, it's our survival's on the line here. So deep in our DNA, leaving the tribe, leaving AA in our core is going to feel uncomfortable. Plus, we're dealing with the mind fuckery of leaving AA and being like, what the fuck was all that? How much of that was that true? And am I actually going to die? So we have a fear of dying as well. Oh shit, am I going to go to jail, institutions, or relapse? Am I going to die? And that's a real fear. I had that fear for a long time when I left AA. So there's all these things that are coming on that are just for the fact of leaving AA. Plus, we add to that the fact that we're no longer getting the daily reprieve, which is a thing and is a vibe and is giving us actual chemicals with all the connection and everything else. So we're not getting the daily reprieve. We're going through all that stuff of leaving AA, which is called exit trauma. Maybe it's not a trauma level. Maybe that's more like a spectrum. And so we get that in varying degrees, depending upon how deep we're in, depending upon who we are, whatever. Trauma always varies, right? But also maybe you're neurodivergent like me, and it's the first time that you're actually not treating your neurodivergence through alcohol or through 12-step. So it's like, oh shit, what is all of this? How do I deal with all this? It's like another level, like a higher level of learning how to self-regulate. Maybe you self-regulated with alcohol and then you self-regulated with AA, but in AA you did things like yoga, meditation, whatever, journaling, and you regulated within Alcoholics Anonymous. But now this is another level because you're not getting all that hit, that daily reprieve that AA gave you. So it's like, what the fuck? What the fuck is all this dysregulation? So if that's where you are now, you're not alone. This is normal. This is what nervous systems do. This is like the journey of a nervous system. I always think about it as like, it's our autonomic nervous system. It's like an autonomic adventure. Your autonomic nervous system had an adventure before alcohol, with Alcoholics Anonymous, and now without alcohol and without Alcoholics Anonymous. Welcome to your fucking nervous system. By the way, if you were deep in it now, in what I call like the after recovery void, that space between leaving AA and figuring out what next, where you're in the identity crisis, you want to deprogram, you are working on deprogramming, and you want to be more clear on who you are and why you're here and move forward, I do have a course called Evolving After Recovery. I will link it below if that interests you. Finding out I'm neurodivergent after leaving Alcoholics Anonymous. So I left AA April 2020, and I found out I'm neurodivergent December 2020. And the way that happened is I was, as you do, reading the comments on YouTube. I love the comment section. That's why I encourage you to join the comment section, share your thoughts, whether you love me or hate me or anything between, whether you agree with me, disagree with me, or whatever. It's so fun to just dive into the comment sections, right? So I was diving into the comment sections, I was reading all the comments, and people were describing on a video that wasn't about ADHD. There was this conversation in the comments about ADHD and what it was like and what they were finding in their late diagnosis and all this. And I was just like, oh snap, that's me. And so I felt like for that week specifically, it was the week around Christmas. It was the last week of 2020. I was like, oh shit, I'm totally ADHD. That makes so much sense. It explains so much of my life. And to be fair, when I first got sober in 2009, I didn't think I was ADHD because I didn't think it was possible because I was still confused. I was ignorant about what ADHD was, and I thought it was that little white boy, the 5-year-old white boy bouncing off the walls, causing chaos or not sitting still. And that's never how it was for me. But I thought in 2009, when I first, like that first year, my first year of sobriety, I was like, oh my God, I'm so ADHD. But I didn't really believe it because it was kind of too early, I guess, in the global awakening or awareness or my own personal evolution to realize that it could actually be me too. And so I was super ADHD that first year of sobriety. I could not focus. I would like not be able to watch a movie. I couldn't pay attention to the characters. I wouldn't remember who the main character was. I'd be like to my roommate, who is this? And then she'd be like, that's like the main character. I'm like, oops, I'm all over the place. And so yeah, I thought for sure I'm ADHD at the end of 2020 when I was like, what, that's like 8 months out of AA. And I go to my hairdresser in Bali, who I'd been seeing for years, and I tell him, hey, I'm like just figured out something that kind of explains my entire life. I think I'm ADHD. And he says, without skipping a fucking beat, and autistic. And it was so weird because when he said that, like two things happened at once. I felt like the entire world stood still and I was in the middle of the street all of a sudden naked and everybody could see me. And it was kind of like, what the fuck? And my whole soul was vibrating. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then another part of me was like, wait, if that's true, I'm kind of getting the body signals that this is a vibe, that this is me, but like this is my truth. But my idea of what autism is not who I am at all. So let's go figure out what autism is then. And so basically, ever since I left the hair salon that day, that was December 30th, 2020, when he said, and autistic. And I just knew in my core, I knew in my soul that it was true. So I went home and basically spent the next 2 years obsessively studying all the autism things, as a lot of us do when we start to realize that we like fit the autism diagnosis or the autism traits, autism assessment. And so, yeah, I studied autism. It's actually my favorite topic. It's my favorite thing because it's so fascinating to study autism. There's just so much. It's just like a never ending, like there's so much that you can learn about it. So I read lots of research papers, books. I read all around perspectives too. I didn't want to get locked into one perspective the way that I was in with AA. So I read perspectives all around the board of all the different views of autism, from the autistic researchers to the actually autistic community to the autism moms to whoever. I just kind of looked at every angle of it, and it still interests me. It's still my favorite subject. It's just there's so much to explore, and I just relate to all of it. So it's been super fun. And the other thing I'll add here is that, so that was 2021, because the end of 2020 is when I realized that autism felt right. 2021 is when I first got diagnosed with autism. And then it was 2024 when I got diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So I didn't actually go for the ADHD diagnosis at that time, because what I was really struggling with didn't feel like the ADHD symptoms. It was autism. It was my sensory system. I'll probably get into later. Let me know in the comments if you want me to fully break it down. But what I was actually struggling with was autism symptoms or autism traits or autism. Really, I was being like traumatized and disabled by it. So it was really loud and really hard. And I was having a hard time, I guess, lifing because of the autistic stuff. So ADHD wasn't on the foreground of my mind then until a couple years later when I wanted more clarity on my brain. Can you self-diagnose as neurodivergent? So when I first realized I was autistic, before I actually got diagnosed, I told my friend in AA, a friend who I know from AA, she was bordering leaving, and I told her I'm autistic, and she asked me, "Can you really self-diagnose autistic?" And then I said to her, every fucking one of us in Alcoholics Anonymous self-diagnosed alcoholic. We all did. So are we allowed to self-diagnose? If the answer is yes, is it no? Is it only with certain topics are we allowed to self-diagnose? Are we only allowed to self-diagnose alcoholic but not autistic? Like, is that ableism if the answer to that is yes? Can we self-diagnose at all? Here's the thing. Alcoholic, as we already said, is not an actual diagnosis. Autism is an actual diagnosis. So this whole question about self-diagnosis, there's really a lot to unpack in the context of addiction, sobriety, and recovery, isn't there? Are we allowed to self-diagnose? So for me, self-diagnosis was, well, it was something that I needed to do before I was going to go through and get an actual diagnosis, right? It was a period where I knew what the fuck was up, but I also wanted a professional to take me through the process, and I wanted to get professionally assessed. I don't think we all need to. I honestly, just my opinion, and remember, I'm a chick in the woods. I'm not a doctor or a practitioner for you, but my personal opinion is people who are not autistic do not go down in my autistic rabbit holes. people who neurotypicals, so non-autistics, neurotypicals are not Googling, am I autistic, and spending 2 years studying all the autism things, making color-coded binders about all the autism things, reading all the autism books on all the autism forums. Neurotypicals are probably not doing that. That does not in and of itself mean that you're autistic. I'm just saying, like, hello, I think we fucking know what we are. Also, the thing that's so hard about, I think, autism is being different your whole life and not knowing it comes with a lot of gaslighting, a lot of the world around you gaslighting you. I call it like a global gaslight, because no matter where I went in the world, people reflected back to me that my thinking, my feeling, my sensory experience, my perception, my autism is wrong. I'm wrong. And so sometimes it was loud, sometimes it was quiet, but it was always reflected back to me that the way I experience the world, my existence essentially is wrong. So that's unintentional gaslighting. And what does that do? It brought me into a place where I began gaslighting myself. So now I'm constantly doubting myself, questioning myself. And then I get into an institution called Alcoholics Anonymous that promotes essentially not trusting yourself. So don't trust your own thinking. Your best thinking got you here. So there's all this rhetoric and in the dogma about not trusting your thinking, not trusting yourself, outsourcing your autonomy to your sponsor, to the group, to a higher power. So then there's this whole predicament about not trusting ourselves, especially when we go through AA, especially when we're autistic and don't know it. So to me, the real healing is self-trust. That's the bottom fucking line. It's about autonomy, agency, personal power, about trusting your own experience. Not that my truth is the truth, but that my truth is my truth. That's the vibe here. For me, I think self-diagnosis is a great starting point, and it could be a great finishing point depending upon who you are, what you want, what matters to you. I know people who know that they're autistic and they don't need a diagnosis. That's how they feel. I would agree. My most recent friend who told me like 2 days ago that, like, my AA friend who's like, actually, I'm autistic. I would agree she's probably autistic because there's traits and you can see them. I'm not here to diagnose anybody, but like, there's traits, there's ways of being, there's people that I vibe with. I think that I'm on a similar wavelength to a lot of neurodivergent people. There's like kind of a thing there, a way of thinking, a way of being, a way of talking, a way of understanding where there's like a connection there. I actually read a study that's really cool, and don't quote me on the study. I wasn't prepared. I'm just kind of coming into my mind, so I'm going to share it with you. But there was a study where something, I think it was a Canadian study, where they looked at non-autistic people. So they looked at neurotypicals and they played the game telephone. You whisper in someone's ear something and it goes around a circle. Then the first person said one thing and the last person then repeats what it was. So they do neurotypicals. They did this. They did it with autistics, and then they did it with a mixed group. It turns out that autistics can communicate with autistics fairly well. Neurotypicals can communicate with neurotypicals fairly well, but when the two try to mix and communicate, there's a mumble jumble. It's a little bit difficult. And because there's more typicals, it's assumed that the typicals are correct. This is like a subconscious thing. This is like a blind thing, a blind bias. That if there's one of you and five of the other people in the group are all getting along and you can't figure out what the communication is, I mean, we start to assume that we're wrong. So there's a lot of this self-gaslighting. So I think that if you if you are to think that you're autistic and you want to pursue a diagnosis or not, it's super individualized. And I don't know what anybody should do. All I know is what I did. I also know that I like YouTube and I like expressing myself and sharing all the things. And I felt like for me, what made me feel comfortable and integrity for me only, is that I felt that I would have be more confident sharing about it on the internet, sharing about it if I write a book about it one day, if I do any sort of projects about it, that if I have the clarity of going through the process so that I could share from that place of being diagnosed, it doesn't mean that my diagnosis is superior to somebody's self-diagnosis. That's just what felt right to me. I think ultimately we got to do what feels right to us. I think it's a self-trust game. I think it's a self-trust game. What do you think? The other thing I want to say is I hold all labels loosely. I hold my autism and my ADHD loosely, and I do not say that to offend anybody who is identifying hardcore with autism and or ADHD or ADHD, which is my diagnosis. I say that because I still have a little bit of, I guess, identity PTSD from Alcoholics Anonymous, knowing that I lived inside an identity, alcoholic, which is not even a real diagnosis, for 10.5 years. Well, to be fair, it was 90 days when I first identified. So 10 years, a decade, I identified as an alcoholic, and now I know that that was a misdiagnosis. So I'm a little hesitant to squeeze my soul inside of like a word that somebody else came up with and say, this is who I am. And so I use my diagnoses, I use autism and ADHD as a map, not as a limit. So really, I'm using it as a map, not a cage. I'm not using it as an ideology to trap myself in, really, because of it's not PTSD, but it's like I'm just hesitant to use any labels and to fully embrace them as this is my identity. But literally nothing has ever felt more accurate than when I learned about autism, about how I've been my entire life. And remember, purple and neon orange are nothing alike. So what I thought it was and what it actually is are totally fucking different, and the spectrum is big and all of that. So, but when I look at myself through the lens of autism and ADHD, it gives me, especially because I'm not in early recovery anymore. I'm not in recovery anymore. I'm not recovering from an addiction. I've recovered. I haven't had a drink since 2009. It's been a while. My brain recovered. It's been a while. And so because I'm not in survival mode from addiction, and because I'm looking at how to best move forward, and I have the autism and the ADHD lens, then I can do things that I know that are research backed and make sense about how to optimize my brain. Not to cure, not to fix, but things that I can do to optimize my actual brain. So I dig into the research. How can you optimize these brains? What might be going wrong in these brains are making it worse? What can make it better? What are things that I can do so that I can experience life with less suffering and have more joy and think better and think more clearly and have a better focus? So I went deep into the research to figure out ways that I can optimize, because now I have accurate maps through these accurate assessments to actually move forward. Oh my God, the doggies are back. Oh, yay. No, I love it. And what I will say, when I have the accurate framework or framework that fits this season of my life or right now, or really my entire life when we're talking about neurodevelopmental things like autism and ADHD, when I have an accurate diagnosis, because I kind of feel like pretty much all the other diagnoses I had were not actually hitting actually what it was, because we didn't know what it was. So we're looking at the other things, not the main thing. And so now that I know what the main thing is, and I can look at my brain and understand how to optimize my brain, I can do things like nutrition has been very supportive of my brain functioning. Light therapy has been freaking amazing. And I am happy to make more videos all about this. Uh, Regular movement, obviously, time in nature. There are some things that I can do specifically when I understand and I have the right framework, meaning the right diagnosis of how to support myself and accommodate myself so that I can thrive, so that I'm not disabled by my neurology as much as possible, right? But that I can actually try to work with it in a way that I can optimize it. Because under the alcoholic identity or umbrella, that did serve me in the beginning of my sobriety, but later on, I was wearing the wrong label. And because I really believed that, I wasn't able to see that what I was calling and what my sponsor was calling and what the people in the rooms who were sharing were calling my untreated alcoholism, my alcoholic thinking, my dry drunk, or like whatever all these terms are that are essentially just made up terms. They're not actually medical terms. That those actually things, what was actually going on there was my neurodivergence. A lot of it was my neurodivergence. And when I was in earlier sobriety, it was also my unresolved trauma, my mental health, my lack of coping skills. So when I have clarity on who I am by actually looking deeper, trusting my intuition, because my intuition knew, I knew in early sobriety I was ADHD, but I really also didn't know that it could be a thing. But I kind of knew what was up with my head. And then I knew it was autism when the guy said, my hairdresser said, and autistic. I knew inside it was true. My intuition said, beep, 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 beep. You got something here. This is fucking it. Even though you don't know what it is, your mind doesn't know what it is. My mind is saying no. My body was saying yes. It's fucking autism. So, yeah, because I'll tell you right now, in 2025, my brain, because I understand it with the correct assessment, the correct understanding, my brain is working better than it ever has in my entire life. I'm doing things regularly, daily, weekly to optimize my brain, to get my brain to work as best as it can, given the cards I was dealt, who I am, what's going on. So now that I understand myself, I can actually thrive. And that's what I want for everybody, especially the autistic girls and women, because we get so chronically misdiagnosed, including in recovery. So, what I did, because a lot of people are reaching out to me, mostly privately, and saying, hey, I'm autistic and ADHD too, and I left recovery, and oh my God, I'm actually neurodivergent, or I think I'm neurodivergent and I'm in recovery or I'm out of recovery. There's a lot of us, like a lot of us, and they're flying at me. If it's you too, you're definitely not alone in this. And so if you want that resource that is all the autism and ADHD things, especially in recovery and figuring it out, and a little bit of a deeper dive here, including the assessments that I took to help me figure it out, including the specific videos that were targeted towards girls and women in autism and how it can look different. I've put everything together on my website in a single page that I think could be super helpful. It's basically like a treasure chest that I wish was available for me when I started, so that I could have woken up and understood myself sooner. And that's all I want, is I want people to know who they are sooner. Because when we know better, we can do better. We can live our potential. We can work with ourselves better. It's the misdiagnosis that really gets me. So if you want access to that resource that I put together for autistic and ADHD individuals, especially in sobriety or recovery, I'll put the link below for that. It's just a page on my website. Okay. Thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun making this for you, and this is such an important topic for me, so I really hope you got something from this. Yes, I want to hear from you in the comments. And of course, share this with anybody that you think might help them get to know themselves better. I mean, I really wish that we can broadcast this conversation from the rooftop so that those of us who are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed can wake up sooner to the freedom and the clarity and, yeah, authenticity to know who we are. And that's really, really important, isn't it? So Yeah, thanks for being here on this little sobriety bestie in the woods adventure with me, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.